Welcome your calls today. Join us on our toll-free number to join the conversation. It's 1-888-539-8859. That's 1-888-539-8859. And guys, it's all yours.
Thanks, Bob. How you doing today, Patrick?
Hey.
We're fist bumping here in the studio at WFBS FM and 107.9 Talking Birds.
Again. Thank goodness, man. I miss this more than anything, being with you, talking birds.
Well, Patrick, it's we're birds of a feather.
Yeah, that's true.
Maybe snowbird and crow, but here we are, man. We're all good together. And I want to give a shout out to our friend Terry Allen,
yes,
and sponsor of the show, and For the Birds, who was in on the first installment.
Yeah, had to cover for me.
And so here we are today on the second installment of Just Ask Us about birds and all other things natural history. I mean, you've got tons of things in your head, Patrick, and that are just ready to fall out for our callers. So we're gonna ask you to give us a call again on that familiar number 1-888-539-8859, and you can check us out on WFBSFM.com. or tune us in on 107.9. And as Shu just said, it's fall migration, right?
Yeah, that's right. It is. We're sort of tail end of fall migration, and it's been really amazing to see all the things come through. And the differences from year to year are just incredible. And I think it's really difficult not to talk about the volatility that we have seen in the last 4 or 5 years of watching natural history of the upstate of South Carolina has been unprecedented. I think would be minor. I mean, we've had 3.7 inches of rain officially here in Clemson since June 1st.
Yeah. So how's the desert garden doing, Patrick?
Fabulous. It's full of birds. It's full of butterflies. And I mean, it's so interesting because you're seeing things like in our desert garden, which if you haven't been to the South Carolina Botanical Garden, come visit the Botanical Garden, go down to where the Geology Museum is. And you'll see the largest desert east of West Texas anyway. But the amazing thing about this is we're seeing native species shifting to southwestern counterparts in the desert garden. So like yesterday on my Facebook, I posted up this picture of this beautiful Polyphemus caterpillar, a giant Saturniid moth caterpillar that was up on a gray oak, Quercus grisea, which is an oak that I'm sure no Polyphemus has ever seen before from West Texas. But they're thriving. They still look good. And a lot of our other oaks have been really deteriorating through the summer, particularly the red oaks, because they have such shallow root systems. We've seen lots of death. We've seen probably 15 or 20 dead big oak trees in the garden alone this year. And really what we're looking at when we have less water than Arizona does in a growing season is we're looking at some life-changing impacts.
Well, I like to think about range maps. And you think about range maps of species, and in the Botanical Garden, you've brought the whole state of South Carolina, on that heritage trail that shows us South Carolina from the mountains to the sea. But when we think about birds flying across landscapes and what they're encountering, what's different, how they adapt to those changes, and then how we as naturalists and birders and lovers of all things wild, how do we help the things get through? So, maybe today we can talk some about that and what you can do in your own backyard as part of the larger landscape.
Yeah, absolutely.
To be a part.
And I think, one of the things during these critically dry years is that, it becomes even more important to be a good steward of your birds, right?
Yeah.
Because you have not only less water, but less food available for these birds over winter. So feeding birds, making sure you have good high-quality suet, high-fat, high energy foods out for the birds as we come into these cooler seasons, making sure that you have good, high-quality seed material out for the birds that are seed feeders, and doing really anything else you can for these birds, but particularly providing a little bit of water. And also, the key to water is the birds really like water movement.
Moving. Yeah. And it doesn't have to be, Niagara Falls. Really a trickle is sort of what attracts them. And we were talking before we got on air, I had the titmice and chickadees just really kind of angry at me because I kind of let things get a little dry for a day when I was away, but that's what the birds need, and that's what they're looking for now. And we think about how long we can do without water, which is not for very long. And you think about these birds in these stressed environments. And so now's the time of year to provide water, and a simple water feature. It can be something as simple as a pan with water dripping into it from a bottle above. Of course, I'm sure our friend Terry can recommend all sorts of watering things and all different sorts of foodstuffs for birds. But now's the time of year, and in these conditions, these environmental conditions, when you can really help birds make it to either that next space that they're migrating to, or maybe have a little easier time in your yard. So what are you seeing in your backyard? Give us a call at 1-888-539-8859. Just ask us, or maybe just tell us, what you're seeing. So, Patrick, I speaking of range maps and climate and weather, we can go to. I like to recommend Birdcast as a place where people can go and get an idea of the birds that are coming in, and so when we begin to look at peak arrivals or birds that are just arriving now, we're beginning to see some waterfowl coming in. But one of the things that we've talked about in the past is continentally, waterfowl aren't really moving in heavy numbers until they have to,
right? Until
they're pushed down. So we can talk about these birds that we call facultative migrants. That's one of your big words for today.
Yeah, so, facultative means you have a choice.
Yeah, you got a choice, right?
Right.
Yeah, it's close to Election Day. You got a choice. So, we think about these birds electing to stay or to go. We've got other birds like our neotropical migrants. We're beginning to see lots of palm warblers. We were out.
Yeah, the garden's chock full of palm warblers.
Yeah, just pumping their little tails, yep. and going along and giving that little soft chip note. So looking for those birds and looking at something like Birdcast gives you an idea of what to look for. But there are other birds that are hanging on longer. I had friends in North Carolina that were telling me they still had rose-breasted grosbeaks at their feeders last week.
Yep. I saw one. It's been about 10 days since I saw the last one. But
wow.
Really hanging on much later than I've seen before.
So it's there are records to be had, and that whole process of kind of thinking about how things are arrayed across the landscape or your backyard and the timing of it all is important. So I think we've maybe got our first call this morning. Do we have a caller? Well, maybe not. Maybe we don't have a caller.
Oh, yeah. Let's see.
But maybe what we'll do is we'll take some questions. I know Terry has been getting a lot of questions from some of his store owners, and we've got Nancy on air. Hi, Nancy. How are you?
Fine, thank you. I wanted to ask, several people in my area have noticed that the bluebirds aren't around, and there's a lot of different species of birds that we don't see that we usually see at this time of year. And I'll hang up and listen, but we're kind of wondering what's going on.
Yeah, that's a great question, Nancy. And one that I think is best explained really by the environmental conditions we've seen this year. I know that, where we have still reliable food, reliable water, we're keeping those year-round residents like our bluebirds at the garden. And in some cases, when they've got much warmer weather than we're typically seeing this time of year, I've gotten a lot of people calling me or writing me and asking me about bluebirds in particular, because they're becoming very territorial about the nest boxes, and they're actually going into the next nest boxes. And we're seeing some very strange behavior out of these birds this time of the year. So I would suspect switches in bird communities that we're seeing are directly related to food availability and directly related to the drought conditions.
Yeah, here's another word, not so fancy, patchy.
Patchy, yeah, patchy.
When you think about what's on the landscape and where water is, where it isn't, birds will tend to track that, and sometimes at scales that's not immediately evident to us. So we may have our water feature, and we always urge you to support the birds in your backyard, but they're moving around the landscape. If we think about what's happening at this time of year. You've got young of the year, you've got juveniles that are out of the nest that are learning, sort of the routes and learning how to find food and those other sorts of things. But again, it's just there are odd things going on. Mm-hmm. Here we are, the 1st of November, and we're going to have 80 degrees
83,
today.
Yeah.
83. We've had nothing near a killing frost.
Not even close.
And so it's it is a different sort of situation going on, and so it bears watching. Because as we set records for temperatures, we're also going to begin to set records for occurrences of birds.
And we're setting those drought records, and that in combination with the hundreds of days that we've had of above average rain, weather, heat this summer has really changed a lot of communities. So patchiness, these birds are tracking into where their food is. They're living no different than any other form of life. They're tracking right along with the food availability, with the water availability, with the things that they need. So we've seen some shifts in areas that we don't regularly water in the garden, right? From maybe bluebirds to things like sparrows and particularly sparrows, but sparrows and goldfinch, which are, inherently patchy and transient and weird.
Right.
But those kind of things are happening, and I think that's the answer to the question. And it bears looking at some of these places like the South Carolina Botanical Garden, where the core of the garden that we actually are keeping moist has had more life in it in those small spaces than I've ever seen. Smashed into a small space before. I mean, when you've walked the trail up through the prairie and everything, and the numbers of birds that we see there versus if you leave that into the unirrigated areas of the garden are just logarithmically lower in those other areas. It's unbelievable.
It's Patrick. I was out in Calhoun Bottoms the other day, the old aquaculture facility.
I was there this morning. Yeah.
And such a great birdie area, but it was kind of pitiful. There were lots of palm warblers out there and lots of Savannah sparrows and more swamp sparrows than Savannah sparrows. But then
every pond's dry except for one tiny, tiny little 5-foot wide piece of water.
And it's gone.
Yep.
It's that little piece. There was one great blue heron hanging out there, one forlorn great blue heron, sort of wondering and waiting for something to wander into that pool. And that was 2 days ago, and now that's all gone. The ground is cracked, and so it looks sort of, it is desolate and forlorn. And so when we think about these patch dynamics, how birds move around from place to place, I mean, your yard is really just a patch in this larger landscape.
Yep.
So the more you can do in your yard to provide food, cover, and water, then the more likely you're to have one of these situations like Patrick is describing in the South Carolina Botanical Gardens, where there are areas that are managed differently, some moister or more moist than others, more mesic than others. And so that wonderful prairie, that wonderful Piedmont prairie, Patrick, that is just alive with all sorts of sparrows. And, to me, it's a lesson for... Well, quite frankly, that's what I want my yard to be at some point. I would love to have a yard with all sorts of native Piedmont prairie species that are providing food and cover for wildlife. So that's one of the things that I know that you encourage, Patrick, when you're asking people to think about their landscapes, right?
Oh, absolutely. And, in encouraging people to maintain what they need to maintain for their state of mind of their order in their yard. But what you can let fall into disorder will order you up a whole bunch more birds.
My middle name is Entropy, man.
Right. So, one of the most important things is great to have those native Piedmont species there, really pulling in the insects and really showing us how when you do things right in our space that we live in, that life responds to it. But it doesn't just have to be native things. Any little area of your yard that you can allow to be a little bit wild and woolly, that you can allow to grow up and let the grasses flower in those areas, will make a huge difference in the number and the quality and the quantity of birds that you have in your yard. And it's not just all sparrows, but we're talking about things like indigo buntings up here in the upstate, painted buntings down in the low country, goldfinches, all these beautiful birds that that you'd like to see in your yard. They need some of those spaces where grasses and thickets are allowed really to grow up.
Well, I'll tell you, along with that, with letting things get wild and woolly, this time of year, as fall falls, as autumn is on board, and we are covered in leaves, it's a great thing to let those leaves lie. Not only are they providing sort of instant fertilizer over time for your yard organically, but they're also hiding spaces for macroinvertebrates, for insects. So, do yourself a favor. Mm-hmm. Don't rake.
Yeah.
I tell people all the time that it's really sort of on this micro scale, these patches that you can have. Yeah, you've got people want to keep some sense of order maybe for their yard, or they maybe have to because of some covenant in their community, in their neighborhood. But where you can have these sort of rank, tangled corners and edges, towhees will find a way there. Song sparrows will find a way there. Our friend Scott Davis showed me a picture the other day of an indigo bunting that it was really late, really dull bird. So indicating to me that a bird that probably had not been out of the nest for very long. And so I have had reports of Carolina wrens. Mm-hmm. And so, we are seeing some different things, but the things that you can do in your yard to sort of be that patch that's favorable, it's pretty easy. So give us a call.
Yeah, give us a call, and you can reach us at 1-888-539-8859. That's 1-888-539-8859. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to take your question, so give us a call. I'm going to put a plug in for a book on kind of we look at these sort of rank areas that we're talking about a lot of times. In the South particularly, we look at them as unkempt.
Yeah.
And it's becoming the fashionable thing to do. But a lot of it is keyed into how you frame the wild and woolly parts of your life.
Yeah.
And when it comes to that, there's an incredible book by a very good friend of mine, Claudia West, and Thomas Rayner. It's called Planting in a Post-Wild World, and I'd check it out. It's a great book, gives you great insight into how to frame areas that really duplicate natural habitats in portions of your yard. And nobody's saying, gosh, you need to... Anybody who has any kind of mown yard or lawn is really doing bad. I'm not saying that. We're just saying, maybe it's time to rethink the 2-acre mown yard and pare it down to something that's more manageable and something that also is keyed into directly what you're talking about. Anyway, Drew, I think what we ought to talk about are some birds that we are seeing this time of year and how you can tell them and how you can attract them to your backyard. So tell me about your sparrows. I've seen your Facebook has been all about sparrows.
Yeah, it's Patrick, I go through this morphing from warbler mania, to kind of and I fall into this brown bird thing. And so sparrows are fall birds. They're with us. Many species are with us all year, but this time of year we get this influx of birds of all different species. The species that I have seen coming in lately, for example, out in Townville around open fields, prairie savanna sparrows.
We get a lot of savanna sparrows in the garden right now, too.
That are coming in. And so that's a bird that first and foremost, kind of this, most of our savanna sparrows, it's a streak-breast sparrow. Most of ours kind of a tawny color, but yellow on the lores and yellow at the bend of the wing. But what I always remember, bubblegum pink legs.
Yeah.
Bubblegum pink legs on that bird.
Yeah, if you see the bubblegum pink legs, you got two choices that come to mind right away. It's either field sparrow or savanna sparrow.
Or savanna sparrow.
Yeah, and then if you see that yellow, and when Drew's talking about the lure, he's talking about the area just up and over the beak. So it's kind of right between the eyes and right up over the edge of the eye, front edge of the eye on the savanna sparrow. And of course, if you're lucky enough to hear one sing, you'll hear that beautiful song that a savanna sparrow has. And that's one of the things about sparrows that I really like. Are the wonderful bubbly songs that these brown birds have.
They are sometimes spectacular songs. I mean, we have some sparrows like grasshopper sparrows that are here with us all year. But
and the grasshopper sparrow, of course, does not quite have that beautiful sound.
No.
I mean, their song's almost difficult to even pick up. It's just
more like an insect, grasshopper. Sparrow.
Yeah, more like an insect. That's right.
And those are birds of sort of wide open, large fields that you'll find in your yard. Probably the common sparrows that we'd see first, song sparrows.
Which, if you're talking about a bird that has a beautiful song,
Oh, man. Yeah.
And everybody's heard that song.
Yeah.
And it's going on right now. It's one of the few birds that's really singing their heart out now that we have some maybe more northern birds moving into our area and competing with the birds that have been here all year in the song sparrow. It's kind of interesting to hear how they've lit up out at the garden.
Yeah, they, and song sparrows. It's funny as we go into the winter, Patrick, and people are out and about, maybe cleaning up yards or checking out rectangles to see what they can find in terms of nests. That's a nest that you'll often find low in shrubs and so forth. There's another bird that you'll have in your yard, another sparrow. So we've talked primarily about streak-breasted sparrows, and that's one of the things that you want to look at when you're identifying these birds. Yeah. Poor Sam Peabody, a clear-breasted sparrow that's here for the winter, white-throated sparrow. Oh.
Isn't that beautiful?
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's kind of weird hearing it in 85-degree weather, but...
Yeah, and it showed up about 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I've ever really associated that with, like, all these flowering plants. I mean, I was watching one as it was flitting around on a tropical xanthosoma elephant ear at the garden the other day, and I was like, what is going on with the world right now? But that is the typical, boy, for me, they sing when it snows.
Yeah. I mean, it's the song of fall and winter.
Yeah.
For us. Now, a close related bird, another Zonotrichia sparrow that we are fortunate to have in the upstate, and you find them across the rest of the state, but white crowned sparrows.
Yeah, and you took a photograph of one right out in the garden, didn't you?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Has a beautiful voice you don't really hear on migration very often.
No.
But if you happen to be where they breed.
Yeah, and so again, you've got to sort of shift as you're thinking about these birds. Now, a bird that many of us have in our yards that we don't think about as sparrows, eastern towhees. So that's a big sparrow. That's all they are. But really big, colorful birds. My grandmother used to call them jories because of that song, that jory.
Mm-hmm.
So, but those are birds of largely kind of unkempt areas.
Yeah.
Chipping sparrows love sort of glades and open lawns, and that's a bird that you'll find sometimes in the middle of a big, wide open lawn. But in terms of the birds and how you identify them, sometimes sparrows put people off.
Yeah.
Because they aren't as colorful as warblers. They're sometimes cryptic, hard to find, hard to see, but the challenges and really recognizing that muted beauty.
That's true. And you know what? For me, as a kid growing up in the mountains of North Carolina, where it was really cold, not like the cold we get here, where we got really cold. Back up there, 4,000 feet elevation where I grew up. So, back then, your main sort of window into bird life once winter came along was at your feeder. Yeah, and these are birds that are super easy to attract to your feeder, all these that we've talked about. And it became a game to me was, which one's the field sparrow, which one's the white-throated sparrow, which one's the white-crowned sparrow, which one is the song sparrow, which one is the vesper, So it becomes almost a game you can play if you're in these areas. And you can attract some pretty doggone cool sparrows to your backyard. And when you realize that white-crowned sparrow that is feeding at your feeder came all the way from the boreal forest to be at your feeder, it's really kind of cool.
And it's, as we go on into the year, probably my favorite sparrow is a sparrow that behaves a lot like a thrush. We'll get in hermit thrushes that sometimes will linger on the edge of the yard, but more likely around wetland areas and kind of mature forest, but also kind of big tangle thickets. Fox sparrows.
Yeah.
And fox sparrows just kind of show up, and sometimes in these loose flocks, but it's a song that you'll hear in the middle of the winter.
In the middle of the snowstorm.
Yeah. And it almost sounds like someone whistling in the woods.
Yep.
So, again, this suite of species that changes. Now, the warblers that we have this time of year, we have the palm warbler that we've talked about that sometimes people will confuse with savanna sparrows because they're often found in the same habitat.
Yep.
But we always remind you to look at behavior of the birds. Palm warblers are tail pumpers, and they'll kind of always continually pump that tail. You're going to see savanna sparrows acting like mice. Savanna sparrows seem sometimes almost reluctant to fly, and when they do fly, they'll go kind of high and they'll fly away and land somewhere else. But we want to remind you that you can attract lots of these birds to your yard. So give us a call, 1-888-539-8859. Tell us what you're seeing in your backyard or beyond, what you're doing to combat the drought in your yard, what you're doing to make your place a better place for birds. Give us a call.
So, feeding to attract sparrows.
Mm-hmm.
What do we do?
Well, the first thing is that, and some sparrows will take the black oil sunflower seeds. I mean, that's primo, right? Millet.
Yep.
And millet is cheap, and you want to scatter it. Some folks, I'll see them scatter it sort of out in the middle of the yard, and you're going to have other visitors that come through to feed on your feeder birds, and so you don't want to make that easy for them. So I think about scattering things like millet. Some people even get things like sorghum, but spreading that underneath your shrubs or sort of in those edges of the yard where you have the tangle thickets where the birds are able to feed, but they're able to do it protected. That's important because we also, at this time of year, we've got an influx of sharp-shinned hawks and Cooper's hawks. And you've probably got a Sharpie or a coop around your neighborhood that's going to hang out maybe for a good portion of the fall and winter. And they make the rounds just as the birds do. I absolutely love accipiters, the bird hawks. But as we're feeding, we want to make sure that we don't create what's called an ecological trap in our yards, so that, you're going to lose a junco or two, you're going to lose a cardinal or two to some of these predators, but you can provide cover and feed birds in such a way that you're not kind of providing an unfair advantage for our raptor friends.
So Nick and I were sitting around out in the garden. A couple days ago. My son.
Yeah, love that guy.
Nick. Yeah, great, pretty good kid.
Yeah.
But we're sitting there, and one of these accipiters came out, and we had that discussion that I think is so cool because I can only have it with a few people about whether that's a sharp-shinned hawk or a Cooper's hawk.
The fighting words.
So he convinced me about the sharp-shinned. I was doubtful for a little bit, but then, so how do you tell the difference between a sharp-shinned and a Cooper's?
Wow.
It's all about the tail, huh?
Yeah, well, part of it is about the tail. When you look at the tail, I think sharp square. And so you think about that, but then size-wise, we know that in some raptors we've got this reverse sexual dimorphism, and that the females tend to be larger than the males. When you look at a male Sharpie isn't much bigger than a blue jay. Not much bigger than a blue jay. Extraordinarily athletic birds that'll just sort of flash through the yard. So that squared off tail. When you look at a Cooper's hawk, a female Cooper's hawk is pretty doggone big bird. And you look at a Cooper's hawk, the tail looks longer, it looks rounder, sort of on the terminal edges on the end. So sort of a rounded off tail, and more of a bullish head on that bird. And so there's something that we use called gestalt. Now, you're going to confuse a female
red-shouldered hawk.
A female Sharpie who will be bigger than the male with a male coop. All right, those are the birds that you would confuse. And so the sharp-shinned hawks tend to be, again, they are quicker. The colloquial name for that bird is blue darter. So the bird that flashes through your yard, the size of a blue jay, maybe a little larger than a blue jay, is probably a sharp-shinned hawk. When the bird is sitting, and they don't often give the opportunity for you to see them, but when they're sitting, look at the head, the size of the head, and look at that tail. You'll often see Cooper's hawk. They appear to be sort of bull-headed. And when I say bull-headed, just sort of a bigger, blockier head and those rounded corners on the tail. When they're flying, it's a little more obvious. Now, but there are going to be times when you just have to say, you know what? That's an accipiter. That's an accipiter. And there have literally been fights. There have been fights over which is which.
And it's good to know too that if you think you're seeing a sharp-shinned hawk in the spring or summertime, you're probably not.
Yeah, but Cooper's hawk is our breeding hawk. Is our breeding accipiter. Is our hawk that we tend to see more of.
And we hear.
Yeah.
And it was funny because one of my neighbors actually asked me what this bird was. It just kept making this incessant this incessant call. You know that.
There you go.
You almost, just have to wonder, what is that, a chachalaca or something? Because it's an odd call for a hawk, because we're used to thinking about the calls that boodio hawks make, that are buzzards, the red-tailed hawks, the red-shouldered hawks make.
Well, you know what that reminds me of, and when I hear Cooper's hawks call, it takes me to the tropics. Because you've got all these forest hawks down there that
laughing
chorus.
Falcons and sharp,
that are in the dawn chorus. And so that sort of reminds me of those birds. So, this time of year, there's an opportunity, as birds aren't more vocal, there's a chance for you to pull out your apps, study your bird songs, and study your bird calls. So what are you hearing? What are you hearing? Give us a call.
Yeah, give us a call. We're at 1-888-539-8859. So give us a call and let us know what you're hearing, or ask us about what you're hearing. And I always love it when people call in and make noise.
Yeah, it's but
Drew's really good at it. So.
Well, there's I need a life, I suppose. It's Patrick, and learning bird songs. Yeah. And I talk about Gestalt and how we recognize birds. There's certainly an art to it. And I watch you botanists in amazement as you somehow keep every Latin name and all the changes in your memory, and you're looking at these petite flower parts and inflorescences and all of these things. In birding, oftentimes you got to sort of step back and you've got to be bold enough to make a guess. So again, let's go at sharp-shinned hawks and Cooper's hawks. Literally, the hawk watchers who may see hundreds of these things in a season are probably at 95% or greater accuracy as they're making these calls, but they're seeing hundreds of them. So think about your yard. With what accuracy do you make a call on a northern cardinal? Well, probably close to 100%, because you see enough of the bird and you're also familiar with certain field marks that help you identify it. So as we go through these migratory periods, as we shifted from warblers and all of these very colorful birds to the little brown jobs, the sparrows and so forth, I want you to pay particular attention to some of these more common sparrows. So spend time studying a song sparrow, that dark central breast spot, that longish tail on that bird, the way the tail on a song sparrow tends to pump as it's flying. So pay attention to that versus a white-throated sparrow. And so you'll see female white-throated sparrows, and you will see juvenile white-throated sparrows that have not undergone the molt yet into adult plumage, that are sort of drab. But pay attention to the behavior of those birds, and that helps you know the birds. Not just to identify the birds, but to know the birds. So, if you've got 10, 15 species in your yard now as opposed to 20 or 30, it's an opportunity to learn.
Absolutely. And, there is a bird that showed up in the garden a couple weeks ago, earlier than I think I've ever seen one show up, which to me is one of these birds that most people think of is, it's so drab, and you never get a good chance to see it, and it's always hanging out in those piles of thickets and blackberries and sort of places you wouldn't want to really go if you weren't a bird. But it has the most beautiful song of any bird.
Unless you're just weird like us.
Yeah, unless you're just weird like us. And it has the most beautiful song of any bird to me on the entire planet. And I love it because it recently was split from 1 to 3 species.
Uh-huh.
And our song for our East Coast ones is something like this.
Ooh.